Hi everyone, and welcome to Recruitment in View, the podcast that's aimed at everything to do with the recruitment industry. Whether you're a payroll company, a recruitment consultancy, a consultancy that supports recruitment companies, or someone like my friend here, Aytan, who's been in talent acquisition, very relevant to our industry also. I'm joined, as I just mentioned, with Aytan Hilton, who's the director of Cubed Consultancy and has recently founded the simplyrecruited.co.uk consultancy. Thank you for coming on board. Lovely to have you here. And this is a great podcast because we're going to sort of flit into now, if I can talk, flicker in and out of the world of talent acquisition, internal recruitment and agency recruitment, and the transition actually, and I really want the audience to hear your story, because most people go from, as I did, I went from an agency recruiter, went in-house, went into HR and made the transition that way, but to actually make the transition the other way is quite an amazing transition indeed. So do tell everyone, give us everyone a sort of insight of how that happened and why you've made that transition.
Thank you very much, Colin. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for the invite today. Pleasure to be with you. So yeah, I guess, to tell my story, it goes back nearly 20 years now. So 2006, I did actually start in the agency world back then. So I found myself with a company called Hill McGlynn, which was part of the Randstad group, although it was VDR back then. So yeah, cut my teeth in recruitment in the sort of sales environment for a couple of years. That kind of progressed into key account management for a few years. Spent a couple of years transitioning sort of client side with RPO solutions. And then, as you've said, I've been sort of client side in-house now for best part of 13, 14 years, most of which has been as an interim myself as well. So yeah, absolutely. TA is now my sort of core strength, core background. Spent many years with leadership teams, executives, private equity investors, looking at TA strategies, operating models, PSLs, frameworks, you name it. Sort of, it's all part of that sort of talent working well system, and that's looked after me and served me very well for a number of years. I've also spent a number of years in the executive search sort of arena. So somewhere around about 220, 225 executive search remits or retained search remits of some description, whether that's delivered personally, whether it's delivered through a team, through third-party suppliers like the Shreks and the tier ones and the boutiques. Lots and lots of sort of senior hiring, exec hiring experiences as well. And that kind of went full circle as per your introduction, whereby earlier this year I looked at a proposition, effectively as a very small, one-man band agency, but drawing upon hopefully, successfully those 20 odd years of delivery experience, both personally and through, teams of varying sizes, scales and scopes across the world. So yes, that's kind of where we got to, and then happy to explain a bit more as we go today.
Great. So my natural question, sort of following, you've talked about the full life cycle, if you like, or the full cycle of recruitment there. What would you say is, because you've seen it both sides, right, openly as I have, which is the challenges that hiring managers have or HR have, depending on where the relationship in the business is. But what would you say is that main problem that you've faced, generally speaking?
So the challenges side of things, I think, for sort of right or wrong reasons, haven't really changed. So, if I think back to 2006 and 7, and I look at, 25, 26 now, a lot of the challenges that hiring managers and organizations face remain the same. Speed to market, scarcity of skills, competitive marketplaces. These are things that have been around before I started. They've been around whilst I've been here, and they still are here today. I think what maybe feels a little bit different today, to try and sort of answer that question more directly, is that recruitment seems to feel even more transactional at the moment than it perhaps did historically.
Interesting.
This is resulting in sort of indecision, procrastination, absence of strategic workforce plans or forecasting. And then, unfortunately, we have seen sort of poor behaviours on all sides of the fence, whether that's candidates, whether it's hiring managers, senior leaders, confusion. And ultimately, I think that's what's making it incredibly transactional. Hiring manager or a company has a need, a candidate, wants to sort of apply for that. and you go through the sort of process, and there's not a huge amount of strategy that's evident as it once used to be. So we have ourselves with very reactive markets, with a short-term outlook to filling a job and moving on. So I think that's kind of one of the challenges that companies and teams have recognised, but the sort of $1 million question is, how do they sort of fix that, and who fixes it? So yeah, that's probably one of the main challenges I'm seeing out in the marketplace at the moment.
So there's a couple of little points there I think are really nice key pinpoint issues, right? On all sides was something I noted here. I totally agree with that. Doesn't matter how I've always seen it. I think there's good and bad and the ugly and everything. The one thing I will shout, and I'm not saying this because I love the recruitment industry and I've been in it for so long as you have, but the fact of the matter is we're so easy internally to judge recruitment agencies. It's amazing, but actually we forget how bad managers are in the treatment of that. And there's another episode where I was talking to another chap. I think it might have been on the episode when I was chatting to the channel director at Randstad, and we were talking about MSPs and the nature of relationships. And I know MSP want to get sticky with their clients, closer with their clients, etc., as the phrase might be. But the reality is the UK market is very at arm's length with recruitment agencies. They've never really sort of got, I mean, America, they could hug them, it's like they're a member of the family, in comparison that we're like about 50 times removed from them, because we don't want to be seen with a recruitment agency like it's some sort of COVID variant, almost. It's like, why they don't want to get close with the recruitment agency baffles me, because I think that's the best thing you can do, is get very close with key suppliers, people that are going to look after you, you're going to look after them, and you're going to have a great relationship in doing so. But it is that all sides not doing great that ruins reputation in this, which is why recruitment does get a bad rep at the end of the day. But it's interesting, your perception of more transactional. And I find that fascinating, because you would think after you and me collectively have done more than 20 years each in the industry, right? Why are we still seeing very transactional and why it's getting worse, rather than, you'd think after all the good recruiters in the industry, we'd be getting better at this, essentially.
Yeah, I think, the delivery side of it, or the agencies, whether that's a collective agency of 10, 20, 50, recruiters, or whether it's, one or two individuals that may have broken away from a bigger brand and started sort of, on their own as a sort of small boutique. It's a huge industry, the numbers have always been thrown around, 40 billion odd, or more revenue, 150,000 plus, recruitment professionals listed out there. It's, I think, pushing 45,000 registered businesses in the UK alone. So, the numbers are huge. There's lots to go after. There's obviously hundreds of thousands of businesses and companies of different sizes recruiting. But there's no moderation, there's no mediation, there's no sort of governing body, so to speak. So the standard, is vastly different from one transaction to another. And I think what has also happened, even more so since sort of the pandemic and remote working, is, even some of the biggest players, the biggest names in recruitment for 20, 30, 40 years, their revenues have been hit. They've had to streamline. Some of their best recruiters and consultants have, left after 10 or 15 years to set up on their own. So we're definitely in a different arena now. And it's a point I'll come to a bit later about, PSL frameworks and so on. But I think when managers are willing to engage services, outside of procurement or outside of the compliant channels, then those right and wrong behaviours will continue to happen, and that's a reality I saw 20 years ago, and I see it now.
It's interesting also from the fact, again, like me, you've seen both, I suppose, sides of the coin, if we call it that, in-house and both agency. I suppose if you were to put your hat on in-house and look at, managing a PSL, what do you look for? Because it's hard when it comes to recruitment businesses. You've got big names, I'm going to say it as it is, of what I know, which is, I won't go into too much around it, but Danny Sullivan's got caught with HS2. I think it's common knowledge, the challenges they faced, and I think they put their hands up on that. That was a payroll issue, shall we call it, with Payway and not being Payway. But I'm not here to judge them. I'm just saying that as an established company, that was, it shows you even an established company can get it wrong. But at the same time, when you are trying to establish a new PSL or a new agency, how do you go about what is the best agency to work for? Because it's almost like the $1 million question. How do you know the rogue from the great, right? Essentially.
And I've done PSLs on a very sort of localized level, that may only have 5 or 6 suppliers on there, because it's very particular, whether it's by geography or discipline. And then I've done it on a global basis where you've got 100 plus suppliers across 30 countries, and that includes MSPs and RPOs as well as frameworks for specific disciplines. So it does depend on scale and scope of what it is you need delivered. To a degree, it definitely involves what percentage of delivery is that supply chain going to contribute. Typically I've seen minimum of 10% of requirements being fulfilled by a supplier or supply chain, anything up to 40 or 50%. So when it is 40 or 50%, that makes your PSL framework even more critical in terms of how you procure them, how you understand and measure their capability. One thing a lot of people forget is that you're not getting a brand onto a PSL. You have to understand within reason the micro level of recruiters or consultants that will be delivering that PSL, because what tends to happen is agency A is on a PSL, they have 3 or 4 excellent recruiters that delivered on that PSL for 2 years. They move to agency B that isn't on the PSL, and actually hiring managers and stakeholders want the recruiter related organization or employer on the PSL, not just the brand. And I think sometimes that's what a lot of companies miss in terms of thinking about not just when they come on, but how long they're on it for. How often do you refresh a PSL or review it? And also, who are the consultants that sit behind the delivery mechanism?
So it's funny you point that out, because I don't even tend to think in that way. I tend to go with the agency, and there's almost an element of trust that there's a relationship with the brand, the agency, and the consultant that will hold on to them. But I've firsthand seen someone go from 3 different companies in the same PSL. I'm not going to mention names, but what you buy from, like people buy from people, so their book, that consultant, is why that agency was successful. And if they've moved for whatever reason, and there could be lots of reasons why people move in recruitment, that's another story, maybe a different episode. But that happening is like, that's why they've probably gone from tier 1 to tier 3 maybe on your PSL, depending how many tiers you've got, how complex it is. But they need to be considered tier 2, tier 1 to ensure you're getting the same level of service at the end of the day, because it's that consultant at the end of the day that's going to make the difference in that supply chain. Normally they're black book, let's be honest. Depending on what you're hiring, right, tends to be the case. In a lot of cases, it's their black book, right, openly, that they've still got. And I know lots of people will say LinkedIn is the new black book and you don't need a black book anymore, but I disagree. I think some of the best industries, the best recruiters, are the people that got the most loyal people. Openly.
I would agree. That's definitely one of the biggest factors for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a natural question. So, you've launched your own consultancy. I suppose what makes this consultancy unique for a new supply chain? Or I'm not pitching your business, by the way, but in curiosity, because obviously you've naturally made that. You've seen the bad and the ugly, as it were. So, it's going to be quite an interesting proposition to sort of know.
I thought about it for a good couple of months. Everyone always talks about USPs, everyone always talks about differentiators, and first and foremost, I sort of don't want to try and say that I'm reinventing recruitment or doing it particularly different to anyone else. That's not why it was created. Often, people feel like there's something wrong or they have to do something differently. And I don't necessarily feel that's the case. For me, the reason I've created this proposition to make available to clients is that, I have 20 years of experience behind me, which equates to, thousands and thousands of hires and tens of thousands of candidate experiences and hiring manager experiences. So, I'd like to think that however I operate is well informed. It's based on lots of experiences that have been good and bad and somewhere in between. And, for me as well, and this is a bit of a risk, but, I'm not a vertical specialist or necessarily a sector specialist. If I had to kind of put it into sort of ring-fenced environment, it's probably corporate functions, I would say.
Yeah.
But I think it's the approach that's undertaken rather than necessarily trying to challenge a finance specialist recruiter or a construction specialist recruiter who, to your point a moment ago, has an amazing black book of contacts. For me, I'm process-led, process-driven, and maybe that's naturally because of the environment I'm coming out of, which is in-house, and therefore, coming at it, that's my differentiator. I'm not necessarily coming at it the same as 100 other agencies would. So yeah, that's kind of why I created it. I know that the volumes of delivery are not going to be, 100 vacancies a year or, 50 placements a year.
But that's not your business model, and it makes sense, right?
No,
you're
exactly.
not necessarily aiming for that. So it's kind of a hybrid. You're doing almost an exec search kind of style, like we would do in-house, right? But maybe not on retained, but you might offer a retained service, but UK doesn't like them. That's a different episode. We talked about that with an exec search consultancy. But the reality is you're offering almost as good as exec search, but from a contingent recruitment perspective, almost.
Somewhere in between. Both from a service level, both from a commercial level. I know that I'm not a tier one, Shrek exec search firm with a 100-year pedigree behind me, and that's why I'm not going to charge 30%. And I'm also not, someone that's got 6 months experience that's sitting in their bedroom and offering it for single digit, percentage.
I was going to echo that. So I always found this funny. I've been in rec to rec, we'll call it that, as mostly in-house delivery. But I've been in that world for a long time in the recruitment space that I've been in. And the funny thing with rec to rec is you can actually get rec-to-rec businesses that have fresh grads. I mean, probably not so much fresh grads nowadays, but they're probably anyone from a hairdresser to someone who worked at McDonald's, right? I think the quality of consultants been flexed is probably the right word. Doesn't mean necessarily better or worse, but flexed in profile. But if you're taking, we'll use the word grad for now, into recruitment to do rec-to-rec, I can't understand why that would work. But that's not even just rec-to-rec. You see that in every industry, right? They'll get someone fresh off the conveyor belt of a university going to recruitment, and some of them, look, with their motivation and hungry to pay off their debts. I was one of them. Went into recruitment to pay off debts, right? Openly, that's how I got into recruitment. It does work, right? 1 in 100, but it does work, and you play the numbers, you get the volume. But what they will never do is bring the quality that comes from someone experienced, and that's what the difference is, right? You bring in a lot of that knowledge, and I think where you have an advantage with this business is, I go back to the grads. The grads are going to play numbers. They're just going to, it is spaghetti against the wall for them, and that's how most people start out in recruitment. But if you're a client and you want to care about your business, actually swapping different styles of recruitment, so you can have the graduate kind of recruitment business that are going to go out and go for the numbers. You've got a specialist who's got his black book, and go for your business and try something. Your approach is going to be very different to the one that's in the black book, that's going to talk to his 2 friends or 20 friends or whatever. That's all he's going to do, versus someone who's going to talk to an entire market and probably get most of it wrong, versus you're going to logically care about a brand and go out there in a very methodical way. So regardless of how good or bad it is, they're going to have a fantastic experience, right? Which actually is more important in recruitment than anything else. Because if it's not the right job, you might have found someone for their next job, right? By a great experience. Absolutely. And that's what the benefit is, right?
People have got short and long memories. If you do something well, they remember you for a long time. If you do something badly, they instantly forget you, even if it was a genuine mistake or a genuine error. You have to be, you don't hang around for 20 years by accident. Yes, we've all made mistakes over a sustained period of time.
Absolutely.
But, I think hand on heart, the reason that we've got that continuity is because for the most part, we've done things, as they should be, with integrity, with conscientiousness, and to a high standard, whether you're successfully placing people or not.
Absolutely.
And I think, someone once said to me, for every one person that you place, which is obviously the end goal,
Yeah.
there could be 20, 30, 50, 100 people that are not successful,
Yeah.
especially in a day and age where, volumes of application have exploded. Available talent in the marketplace in certain sectors and disciplines is very high at the moment, because of circumstances in the economy. So yeah, you're going to be letting down a lot of people, who don't get a job, a lot more than you're saying, congratulations, you've got the job. So, that's a fulfillment that we've enjoyed for 20 years. But, a lot of people forget you've got to, also close out, 10, 50 times more people than you're closing down for a successful placement. Yeah, a
Absolutely.
lot of people forget that bit.
100%. So, I always like to ask at the end of the sort of initial sort of questions and stuff like that to kind of get the crystal ball out. It's great for me from a guest perspective to, where's things going? And I'm fascinated by this, by yourself more so, because you've seen more than one side of that coin. And I suppose, it was interesting some of your comments before. We've got more transactional in terms of recruitment. With there is the same hiring manager challenges, but I mean, I'm seeing weird things in terms of we've got a lot of legislation change. The employment rights bill is going to make a huge impact, probably to manager behaviours openly. The finance bill's already had an impact of panic, and I think that will carry on until they actually work out how good HMRC is at auditing people. Then they'll panic some more, and then we'll have that over the next couple of years openly. But I think in terms of where the world of talent's going, I definitely think there are pockets of industries that, I talk to recruitment businesses quite a lot, and, we're talking about hospitality, construction's a huge hot topic. I know the government want to invest in people in construction, but you can train somebody up, but you're not replacing 20 years of experience when they leave the UK or decide to be an Uber driver because it pays more now than working in construction, sadly. So, when we're in that scenario, we're going to have major talent impacts. What do you think you see from a talent perspective that we need to be
Yeah,
aware of, or you think that's going to come and hit us, essentially?
I think there's a couple of points, and the first one for me, I think we're still kind of in the crux of it, but there's a few years to go. So if we think about the spectrum of talent demographics in the workplace today, from 18-year-olds that are just maybe leaving school or apprenticeships and so on, through your graduates, your early careers, experienced hires, and so on, all the way through to people at the latter stages of their careers and approaching sort of retirement. My view on it at the moment is, and probably for another 5 or 10 years at least, is that spectrum of talent and demographic is at its widest for about 50 to 100 years. And by that, I'm talking about, your digital natives, your digital nomads at one end, and your more traditional sort of analog individuals that have just caught the digital age and just seeing the introductions of the AI age at the other
Yeah,
end. And
yeah,
then all of us, somewhere in the middle. So I think from a talent acquisition, talent management perspective, that's a really tricky one to manage because, trying to bring in an inclusive and diverse, demographic with the challenges that we're seeing, whether it's with ageism or neurodiversity or whatever it might be, it is at its toughest at the moment, and it probably will be for another 5 or 10 years before the majority of the workplace is genuinely digitized or genuinely tech um, enabled. So that's one thing I think that companies and organizations will have to overcome for another 5 or 10 years at least. Obviously, the next big one, that's in every conversation is AI. So
yeah,
from a talent and recruitment specific perspective, I think a lot of companies are still completely in the dark how they use AI. Not what it does, not what it's for, but genuinely how do they use it? Because I was at a sort of a round table recently at a breakfast event, and someone that was at the forefront of AI for 20, 30 years said, they believe the biggest challenge AI has at the moment is people trusting it. So not that do they believe that there's a robot at the other end of the phone, or
yeah,
who's screening me on the other side of the Teams meeting? a lot of us are past all of that now. We know that
Yeah.
the technology exists. We know it's been tried and tested to a degree, and it's iterating. But it's that trust level. So the same way that people, did or didn't trust recruiters, and were they going to spam them out to their clients, or were they going to represent them appropriately, or have they even asked me for my latest CV? Not that AI is replicating that, but it's doing other things, and who's accountable for that? So
Yeah.
what entity is accountable for the behaviors, good or bad, of that AI? So I think that's the other thing at the moment, that companies are sort of saying, well, let's implement it, let's introduce it, let's integrate it. But I think they're completely in the dark of how it's actually going to turn out.
Yeah, and there's this tug of war. It's almost like, yeah, we want to go ahead because we want to be competitive and we want to have this, but we're really worried about what the hell that's going to do to us, right? And it's almost like a catch-22, the yin and the yang of the good and the bad of AI.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
absolutely.
can see it in the behaviors, right? AI is a fascinating one because there are some things that have been predictors of AI, like we're all going to have hotel check-ins with AI robots and stuff like that. And to be honest, they've had these in Japan for years. We won't go to Japan for now. That's another podcast. But what I will say is we're probably not going to have that, because hospitality is going to drive more people interaction. We can log into a hotel on a screen and it doesn't even need AI. But there's certain things I think will be we go back to that push-pull that will really go against it, and some that will really embrace it. And I agree. I think 10 years plus it's going to take to actually find out where that middle ground is, and it is trust, I think. But there's two things that's an observation from me I wanted to point out, which was, I know you do a lot around tech implementation on your consultancy side. There's not many people that actually are very good with tech implementation, and there's not a lot of people that understand the process. Because a lot of it is, you can have AI in anything, but
Yeah.
if you've just got a bit of AI which is just ChatGPT on the side, it's not actually making much business impact. Like, I know ChatGPT is great to an extent, but AI would be much better if you had it inside a process, or you had a dedicated person that you're replacing that repetitive job with.
Yeah.
But no one knows how to sort of design or map out, is probably the right word, these kind of processes. Have you got any sort of tips around that kind of side of it? Because AI is obviously a hot topic
Yeah,
naturally, right?
definitely. So, I've got sort of a blessing and a curse. So I'm not a techie or an engineer myself, and that's fine, because I have access to subject matter experts and client side or supplier side experts, that can take care of that. And then, I've got the kind of blessing of having seen things from a process and operational perspective to understand why or what that tech is being brought in to do. So works well as being a conduit between the two. But you sort of hit the nail on the head a few seconds ago, where until you understand the process that you're trying to improve with a piece of technology, whatever it may be, automation, integration, AI, machine learning, whatever it might be, too many people kind of think that having approved a business case for a solution or a platform, and then implemented it, that they've won, that everything's fine. That's where a lot of them fall down, and actually taking a bit longer to plan things and understand them is when that technology is successful, because it's an enabler rather than the solution. And we can go back long enough to remember when LinkedIn licenses and recruiter licenses first came in. Everyone brought them and thought, brilliant, I don't have to do much now, because it's going to do it all for me. But
Yeah.
people weren't managing their project folders, they weren't managing their in-mail campaigns, they weren't, it wasn't just switch it on, pay $5,000 a year for it, and off it goes. You had to feed the machine, so to speak. And yes, 15 years later, a lot of it now has got AI enabled agents behind it, or it's got things that are automated and streamlined, but you still have to feed the sort of beast, so to
Yeah,
speak.
yeah, yeah. We're far away from a machine feeding a machine,
Yeah,
which is
exactly.
almost like people want to go from like 1 to 100 in a day. It's
Yeah, the
almost like
step
because they
change.
believe,
Yeah,
no, you've got
it's
to
too great.
educate it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and that's where I think having spent the last 7 or 8 years in that sort of world of implementations and integrations with that hat on, I spend more time talking through the solution and sort of user requirements gathering and, you know, what we're designing the solution for, rather than the actual solution itself. You know, we can take ATSs as an example. I think at the last count, there was something along the lines of 540 global ATS products available in the marketplace. And that,
all of them have got AI. By the way,
they're all market leading. They've all got AI, and you know, but that in itself is insane, because, you know, any organisation that wants to either go from one version to another, or hasn't got one yet and wants to implement it for the first time, if you said to someone, you know, of anything, whether it's clothing or a piece of technology, you've got 540 options out there. Where would they start? And that's, you know, thankfully where, you know, that's kept me working for a while, because I help them kind of funnel down what they do. But there's also some great websites and aggregators that, you know, I can speak of that do that, you know, as a service as well. So obviously they've spotted, you know, a gap in the market, and what they've done is created a platform for people to go to and understand, you know, based on capacity, capability, volume, price. You know, they can filter down that 540 to a choice of 10 and then procure it from there.
100%. I think you and me, naturally, as we always do, not just for the benefit of this podcast, could talk for hours about recruitment and everything around it. The one thing I think would be great, and I'd love to get you back on the show at some point, is actually to talk specifically about talent acquisition. I think there's a whole podcast and probably several episodes of it, the good, the bad and the ugly of talent acquisition in all sectors. But I think for today, thanks for coming on board and talking about the lovely business you've launched. We've definitely got a great insight in terms of that, and all the challenges coming. I think watch this space with AI, and if any listener ever needs any help, I'd highly recommend Aytan. He's a great help in many things in the world of recruitment. So reach out to him, and hope to have you back soon. All right, thanks for your time, mate.
Well, my pleasure, Colin. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and look forward to speaking again soon.
Take care.
Cheers.